Looks like we have a good question already in the chat. Hey guys,
Lucas.
Decided to jump on a couple minutes early just to see how streaming's going. Let us know if you can or cannot hear us, or if you can or cannot see us. I know that seems strange because Nigel and I can see each other, but who knows if you guys can even see us. Yes, great. Thank you, Tracy. I really appreciate it. Lucas asks, how long has Nigel been into type? Nigel, you want to answer that now?
15, 20 years, maybe. Let's say 20.
Okay.
Yeah, something like 20 years. Yeah. Hi, Lucas. I see someone's Vance is making a Spinal Tap reference. It's my second favorite comedy.
Oh, I cannot. I haven't seen that, so unfortunately, I see that.
It's a must see. Yeah.
Hello, Cleveland. So Tracy, you're saying the sound is echoing here. If the rest of you, can you also hear an echo? If not, feel free to probably refresh, see if that works. No echo. Okay, great. Thank you.
Good. Okay.
All right, good. So we are good so far. Please let us know. I know that sometimes we get plagued with issues, but we really appreciate your guys' feedback. So we're going to start in just a minute. Oh yeah, Tracy, if you have it in on 2 windows, then you'll hear the echo. And I'm just really flattered that you have us in 2 windows. That means you really
surely one's enough.
I know. She wants a surround sound InDesign type. So please share this out. Use the URL above, which is crowdcast.io/e/Nigel French, and let everyone know we're going to get started in just a minute. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the question tab underneath, and we will answer the questions afterwards. Yes, great. If you do hear an echo, then you probably do have us in 2 tabs. So that just means more in InDesign for you. Great. I'm glad to hear that it's working.
Well, thanks everyone for logging on.
Right. Excellent. So we're going to get started. I just wanted to say thank you so much for logging on and also sharing this event. I'm Rachel with TypeEd, and we're here in Typography Dojo. I'm based in Los Angeles, and I'm here with Nigel French, who is all the way from across the pond, as they say, in England. And thank you, Nigel, for joining us today. Nigel is a designer and an author of one of our favorite books that we recommend to all our students. And we not only recommend, but we require them. So yes, you know the book.
Great.
Exactly. Called InDesign Type, and Nigel tells me that it's going to be in the 4th edition very soon. Is that correct, Nigel?
That's right. I'm currently, I've just passed the halfway mark. So I've crossed a major milestone with the rewrites, and it should be out, reasonably, I would say about May time. Yeah. And
Excellent.
It's going to be bigger and better and more colorful than the previous edition.
Well, I'm very excited. I mean, we use InDesign on a daily basis. And so anything that you can give us to help us improve our type, of course, is much appreciated. So just to answer Lucas's questions, TypeEd is a typography education program. We teach typography, mostly digital, not only around typesetting and a lot of paragraphs and pages, but also in the Word with logos and multiple pages and whiskey labels and all sorts of things, how typography affects readability. And so that's why I'm really happy to have Nigel on today, because this is exactly the subject that he deals with and helps us all improve our type. So Nigel, is there anything else you'd like to say in terms of introducing yourself?
No, not really. I think you've said enough, really. Yeah, I'm a graphic designer based in the UK. I do travel quite a lot to California, mainly to record content at lynda.com, which I've been doing now for about 12 years. So I have quite a few lynda.com library.
And so you're in Southern California a lot then?
I am, yeah. I try and come in the winter when it's winter here, so I can
It's your second
avoid
home.
as much of it as possible. Yeah.
Excellent. So I would love to know from all of you guys, how many people use InDesign? So I'd love to see what the level is, if you're an InDesign user, and if you are an InDesign user, if you are, do you feel like you're a beginning InDesign user? If you're intermediate, possibly advanced InDesign user, would love to get an idea of what your level is in terms of using InDesign. Sandy uses it practically every day. You're an advanced user. Wonderful. Excellent. We love that. I mean, there's some people who do use type in Illustrator, and I don't know if I know that you use many different applications and teach in many different applications, Nigel. So do you feel like InDesign has a huge advantage in handling type over Illustrator?
Yes, if you're going beyond a page, certainly. Yeah. If you want to create a logo, then Illustrator is the place to be. But anything more than a couple of paragraphs, and then you need to move to InDesign.
Of course, great.
Yeah.
So it looks like we have mostly intermediate and advanced.
Cool.
Yeah. So this is great. Excellent. Great. Thank you guys so much for sharing that. I really appreciate that.
Well, I think my presentation is going to be pitched at an intermediate level, but it's always difficult to gauge these things. That's a very subjective thing. I'm sure for you, long-time users, some of the stuff I'll say you will already know. Well, most of it you probably already know, but hopefully there'll be a few things that'll be worth hanging in there for.
Well, also remember everyone that this is a live session. So if you have questions, we have the master here live to answer any questions. So again, put the questions under the Ask a Question tab underneath, and then we will answer them after the presentation. That's okay. Okay, great. So
all right,
Nigel, if you're ready to get started.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Okay, excellent. So we'll go into the desktop.
Oh, you need me to share my screen?
Yeah, when you're ready, yeah.
Right.
No worries. Advantage.
There we go.
Excellent.
Okay, well, what I'm going to be doing is showing you the typesetting of a novella. I've chosen The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka, and it runs to about 60 pages. It's all type, and it's a very simple document. There's body text and there's section openers, but it's essentially one style throughout. And in doing this, I want to talk about some basic design decisions that I would make in terms of page size, margin size, type size, leading size, justification options, hyphenation options, and then fixing those problems that inevitably will occur, like short last lines and widows and orphans. So I'll just pop over to InDesign. I've even got a cover for it, but I'm not going to be showing you that. But this is it. It's just text. It's all text. But we're hopefully going to see how we can make this text the best text that it could be. And even with a simple document like this, there are quite a few decisions along the way. So the first of those decisions is, what typeface are we going to use? And this is my thinking. Now, I'm not, this is more about the process than don't get hung up on the individual fonts that I'm suggesting here. I started out with Teaser Pro, and for no other reason than I just really like Teaser Pro. It's a slab serif font, and it is my font of the moment. And if I were doing this a year from now, I might have a completely different font of the moment, probably would. So I'm sure you're the same, you know, fonts go in and out of popularity with you. So I thought Teaser Pro would give the book a contemporary look. I thought about, well, this book was published in 1915, so maybe I need to choose something that's historically a bit more appropriate. So I thought about century, which, and I didn't do a tremendous amount of research on this, I have to admit, but it seems like century was a popular typeface around that time. And then I came across an article that said that Franz Kafka's favorite font, and one he used on a magazine that he published, was Warbaum. In the end, I didn't go with any of these, but instead I went with a typeface called Utopia. And Utopia is similar to Warbaum. And I chose Utopia over Warbaum because, well, I have the full set of Utopia, so there are practical considerations that are influencing me here. It's available on Typekit, and I have it in open type format. So I've got things like small caps and different numbering styles and an extended character set. So that was my thinking. A plug for Typekit, very useful way of drilling down to making a font choice by using its classification sidebar. It's not perfect by any means, but just by checking these different boxes, you can come up with, as in this example, a slab serif, good for body text with a regular weight, regular width, a high X height, and a normal contrast. Speaking of X height, this is just one factor, and it's not, I wouldn't suggest that you make this your only consideration by any means, but Utopia is an example of a typeface that has a high X height. That's the relative height of the lowercase characters. And with all things being equal, a high X height is considered more readable than a typeface with a. It also means that at a given type size, it's going to look slightly bigger than a typeface with a lower X height. So I've made my first decision. I've made my font choice. Now, when I place my text document, inevitably, there are going to be extra returns, extra spaces, and who knows what else. So the first thing I want to do with it before I even start formatting it is clean it up. And I would clean it up using these predefined grep searches in Find and Change to remove any extra spaces, any extra returns. Or I could use a very useful script that comes with InDesign called Find Change by List. Then I want to turn my attention to thinking about my page geometry and my page size. So this is a diagram of page construction. I think this method was devised by Jan Tschichold, a very famous typographer of the mid-20th century. And he studied medieval manuscripts and came up with this methodology for determining what would be the optimum type area on a page, as indicated by the gray rectangles. Now, this is very interesting, but practically in the modern age, this would yield margins that would be too big. So I've taken this as a starting point, but then adapted it, and I've made my margins smaller, my type area a bit bigger. I'm using a classic aspect ratio for my page. It's a 6" by 9" page. That's in a 2:3 aspect ratio. And also factoring into the choice of my margin size is the size of type, which I've gone for 11.5 points, and the height of my leading, which I've gone for 15 points. So these two things are working together, the type size and the leading. 11.5 on 15, which to me seemed like it was working well. And a big part of that decision was my line length. How many characters can I get per line? And in experimenting with my type, before I set my margin, I'm using my info panel, triple clicking on this line, and it tells me that I have 60 characters. Now, there's no magic number for how many characters you need, but excuse me, somewhere between 50 and 65 characters is a good range. And this is going to allow you to justify your type, which I like to do. I like the look of justified type without having too many variations in the size of the word space. With all of those things combined, I've come up with my margins, and I've determined my point size, 11 point, my font, my point size at 11.5. And because it has a high X height, Utopia standard at 11.5 is going to look bigger than Caslon, for example, at 11.5. I've also added a first line indent to the paragraphs. And for my first line indent amount, I'm using the size of my type, or 1 space. And I'm also, now hyphenation is, I believe, a necessary compromise, especially if you're justifying your type. By allowing your words to break, you will find it much better to maintain an even type density and not too much variation in the word spaces. But I've mentioned I want to justify my type and I want to hyphenate my type. Now, InDesign's default justification settings and default hyphenation settings are not so good. So I'm going to be changing them. So it's at this point where we pick up my work in progress. So I'm now going to switch over to InDesign, and I'll come to my starting document, which at first glance might not look tremendously different from my finished document. I'm going to turn on a layer called numbers, and I've just added this layer, just added these numbers to my master page spread so that I can very easily reference a particular line. These numbers, by the way, are non-printing, so when I press W to hide my guides, they go away. I'm also, and I'm in my normal view mode, I'm going to come to my preferences and to composition and turn on a very useful composition preference. It's this one, H&J, hyphenation and justification.
Cool.
So I'm now going to see in yellow where the word spacing is not as good as it could be. Now, it is a bit of an oversimplification to say that yellow is bad word spacing. What it actually equals is where InDesign can't do what you're asking of it, in the justification settings. So let's see how we can improve this. And I'm going to break this down into individual steps. I'll edit my body style, and the other styles are based on body. So when I edit this one style, they will also change. And I'll come to my justification settings. Now, these are the default justification settings. I should mention the paragraph composer, which I'm not going to change it. It's on. It's a good thing that it's on. It means that InDesign, in determining how it can best achieve the desired letter spacing, word spacing, glyph scaling, is going to look within the whole paragraph rather than line by line. But what I am going to change is, first of all, my word spacing. I'm actually going to make it stricter than it is at the moment. And this is going to start out by giving me more, not less, highlighting. what I'm saying here is that my word spacing can vary between 80% and 100%. And what we're aiming for is between 80% and 120%. What we're aiming for is 100%. What the type designer decided was the width of a space. Now, there are two other options here, letter spacing and glyph scaling, that are currently not really being used. So by allowing a very small amount of letter spacing to vary between -2 and 2, that's going to help tremendously. And you can see that some of that yellow highlighting has now gone away. I'm also going to allow a very moderate amount of glyph scaling between 98% and 102%. And we see that that has got rid of most, not all, and nothing I'm going to do is going to get rid of all of those yellow highlights. There are still going to be some at the end of the project, but we want to get rid of as many as we can. So a big change here by modifying the justification settings. Now, I would move on to hyphenation straight away, but before I do that, let me just point something out with a screenshot. So one of those things that made a big difference was glyph scaling, and purists might say you should never indulge in such dark practices as glyph scaling. It's a very bad thing, and bad things will happen if you use glyph scaling. But here we see the different, I mean, glyph scaling is the horizontal scaling of the characters. So here's the difference between 98% and 102%. And those are the extremes that it can go to. And this is a considerable magnification over my type size. Now, I think this is a small price to pay for the much more consistent spacing. So the next thing I want to do is turn on hyphenation, and not just turn it on, but also change the default settings, because once again, the default settings are not so good. I'm going to be using these settings, and I'll explain those as I input them. So once again, I will edit the body style. We'll turn on hyphenation. Now, the default hyphenation settings are very, very liberal, and I'm usually completely down with being very, very liberal, not when it comes to hyphenation. So I'm going to say that only words with at least 7 letters can hyphenate, and I don't want any 2-letter stubs, so I'm going to increase both of these. I'm going to make both of these 3. And I don't want consecutive hyphens, so I'm going to make my hyphen limit 1. The hyphenation zone has no effect. That's only relevant if you're using the single line composer. But for the better spacing, I'm going to, for the spacing slider, I'm going to move that over towards better spacing. And you can see here, this is the choice we have. We can have better spacing, or we can have fewer hyphens. And we'll swing the slider one way or the other. And then we have these 3 checkboxes. I'm going to turn off 2 of them. I never want my last word of a paragraph to hyphenate. I never want a hyphenation across a column. But I am going to leave capitalized words hyphenated. And this is something that you will need to judge on a document by document basis according to the nature of your text. Now, in this book, the name of the protagonist appears frequently, and I think it's okay to hyphenate that, because once the reader has read it a few times, they're not going to be the least bit distracted by seeing it hyphenated. So that's my rationale there. And if we move through the document, we can see that most of the highlighting has now been addressed. Most of those hyphenation and violation sorry, the hyphenation and justification violations are gone. The next thing I want to do, though, is introduce some grep styles. Now, the grep styles I'm going to use will fix short last lines. I need to find an example of where we have a short last line. I think towards the end. There was one somewhere. You never find the problem when you need it. Okay, well, I'll just go ahead and do it anyway. So once again, edit the paragraph style and come to grep styles. Now, I've got them already in here in place. I just sort of deactivated them by applying none to them. So the way a grep style works is it looks for a specified pattern in the text and then applies a specified character style to the found pattern. I'm using 3 here. By far the most important is this first one. And it's going to apply a character style that I've already created. It's called no break. But I'll create it again just so you can see what's going on with this character style. The no break character style has one attribute only, and it's that. So anything that has this character style applied to it will not break across the line. Now this is my grep expression. Now I don't really know much about grep, but I know enough to be able to go out and find the grep expressions that I need and then copy and paste them into the relevant fields. What this expression means is find any character, that's the period, and then the 8 in squiggly brackets, that's find any string of 8 characters, and then the /r means at the end of a paragraph. Now, why 8 characters? That's my subjective call on this. Anything that is a word or 2 words less than 8 characters is going to create a very short line. Anything more than that is going to be fine because it's going to be longer than the first line indent of the next paragraph. Now, in addition, I'm applying these other 2 as well, and I'm going to apply the same character style. I'll just use the other version of it, but it's doing exactly the same. And this one here is saying find single character words, A and I. And this is case sensitive. So it's finding A followed by a space, followed by a word. It's finding I followed by a space, followed by a word. Because I don't want those single character words to occur at the end of a line. I want them to be not fused, that's giving the wrong impression, but I want them to be carried down to the next line with the word that follows them, or maybe the word that follows them to be carried up to the previous line. And then just because of the nature of this text, you'll need to look at the content of your text, but there's quite a few instances of the Mr. and Mrs. salutation. Don't want that to be separated from the name that follows. And then my third grep style, and this one doesn't make a whole lot of difference, but just a personal preference. I have a character style that is set to a width, the character width of 75%, and that applies to my em dashes, just so that my em dashes don't appear too wide. So now I'll go ahead and apply that. Now, just so that we can see what that's doing, I'm going to come and edit the no break character style, just temporarily. I'm going to turn on an underline, and I'll give that a color. And I'll also make it a quite heavy underline. So we now see that the last 8 characters of every paragraph have that no break applied to them. And that would prevent, if there were any of these problems likely to occur, it would prevent them.
So Nigel, may I ask you a question?
Yes, please.
So for the no break or for the grep styles, how, let's see, so I don't use grep. I use some of the ready-made grep styles, you know, the pre-select ones. How much study does it take to actually use them? Do you need to really understand all those codes, or is it something that you can just plug and play with?
You can definitely just plug and play, and after a while of doing that, you'll acquire enough to be able to do some serious damage. Okay. Just enough to be dangerous. But there are tremendous grep resources out there on the InDesign Secrets website. There is a page devoted to useful grep expressions, and there's also the InDesign grep Facebook page, which one of the attendees, Lucas, is very active in, and it's a very helpful community. So if you are having problems with getting your grep style or your grep find change to work, then you can post a question, and people seem very, very willing to help out.
Great, thank you.
Now there is, I'm just going to do one other little tweak here that you don't need to see this, but then I've just done that so that you can also see it now applied here to the single letter words. Now, obviously, we need to make sure we turn that underline before we go to print, but that's just my way of giving some color. I can see what is going on. And I just wanted to find, a really good example is eluding me. Okay, well, here's a not great example, but still an example. No, that's, no. All right, well, one will come across one. Do a few more things. I did forget to do something, and that something is I'm using hyphenation, so I also want to be using optical margin alignment. And optical margin alignment will take your hyphens and your punctuation at the end of the line, and it stick them out beyond the right edge of the text frame. That phone is going to stop ringing any second. Okay. There we go. Right. So I'm a big fan of optical margin alignment. Some people think it looks weird, but I think it looks great, and it's so easy to implement. All we need to do is select the text frame, either with the selection tool or the type tool, and then we can just come to the story panel. We just check that box. There's one thing that we can change, and that is the size. And this, you might want to just adjust it to your taste, but start with the point size text that you're working with. So that's why I've got 11.5 points in there. And if we just take a look up here, we can see that where we have these hyphens, they now stick at the edge of the frame. So that now just leaves me to address any widows and orphans.
Am I still here, guys? Yeah? Hey, Nigel? Okay. Did we lose Nigel or did we lose me? Nigel has frozen. Okay. Nigel, can you refresh? Okay, great. I wasn't sure which one of us. Let's see if he comes back. Hey, Breck, I'm still going, right? It's very cold. Yes, exactly. Let's see if Nigel can refresh. Nigel, if you can hear me, please refresh. I think we've lost you. Oh my gosh, we got just was getting to the good stuff too. Okay, here he's coming back, hopefully. Yay, excellent. Thanks, guys, for letting us know. Really appreciate it. Let's see if he comes back here. All right, if you guys have any questions, please put them underneath the tab. I have a ton of questions, actually. When Nigel gets back, I have questions about hyphens. I don't know if you guys do, but here in the US, our corporate America do not like hyphens. So I want to ask him about that. And I love the H&J violations. I would love to know what you guys have discovered so far that you didn't know before. For me, it's been the H&J violations, and I'm just dying to see if there are other types of violations as well. I'm locked up? Oh no. Oh my gosh. Okay, well, wasn't sure if I was locked up or not. So let me just get Nigel back on and let's see if we can continue. All right, so let's get Nigel back on. And I'm back, yay! Yay, love technology. I wish we could just get everybody in one room so we wouldn't have this issue, but thus is technology. So we'll invite Nigel back on. Okay, excellent. Glad you guys are keeping us updated because sometimes we don't really even know if we're here or not. So I was mentioning that here in the US, sometimes corporate America does not like hyphenation, and I'm interested in if there is any type of hyphen violations. Great, yes, Treasures of Grep. That is a really good Facebook group, actually. I don't use grep very often, but I find that one, and there's also an advanced, there's an InDesign group run by Pariah as well. I think it's just called InDesign, and it's a Facebook group. That one's very, very active and is very helpful. And I think there's also advanced graphic design. Those are the ones that I usually go to every once in a while. Hey, Nigel.
I'm back. Sorry,
Yeah,
I don't
back.
know what happened then.
That's okay. We're like, oh my gosh, we got to like the suspenseful part.
Yeah, you.
Oh, we missed it. Excellent. Yes, InDesign Secrets group, Lucas, that's a very good group as well.
Yes.
We're just talking about Facebook groups.
Cool. Good. I'm glad you. Thanks for filling in.
Oh, of course.
Right. So I was saying that in order to fix the problem of this orphaned line, this line that is disassociated from the rest of the paragraph occurring at the bottom of the page, I'm actually going to target this paragraph and apply some tracking, some adjustment of space between the characters, between the letters and the words. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to use tightening. I tend to always favor making it tighter rather than looser, although if things get desperate, I might apply a bit of both. But before I do this, I want to make sure that the result is going to be as imperceptible as possible. So there's an important preference that I need to just check out and, if necessary, change. So I'm going to come to my preferences and to units and increments. And it's this one right here. Because when you install InDesign out of the box, you know, the metaphorical box that it comes in, then this value is 20. And that is, the way I'm about to use tracking, that's a much too coarse an increment. So I'm going to make this the smallest amount possible so that when I now apply the tracking to my selected paragraph, and I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut, Option or Alt on my left arrow, we'll see things change up here. Now, 1 is not going to be enough, and neither is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, well, that's ideally, I wouldn't want to use more than -5, but I would allow myself to go up to -10. So if I couldn't achieve what I wanted to within that range, then I'll just have to try and find another solution on another paragraph. But in this case, I'm going to leave it with that, and we see that that has now brought back a line from the previous page, and this line is no longer orphaned. There's one other composition preference that I want to draw your attention to, and it is this one, custom tracking kerning. And then that will show you in green wherever custom tracking has been applied.
Whoa.
Because you may have, I'm doing this last, and I'm doing it reluctantly. So if my text flow changes, maybe my text is edited, something about my text flow changes, the tracking that I have applied, maybe I no longer need to have it applied, so I can easily target where it's been applied. Or another usage of this composition preference is when you're inheriting documents from other people and you want to see where they have applied tracking, because they may not have done it with as much sensitivity as you might like. It's a often used feature. So that is essentially the finished product. Of course, there are still going to be individual issues here and there that might need addressing, but I now have my nicely justified type, and we've avoided any runts, we've avoided those and orphans, and good type density.
It's beautiful.
Thank you. Right, well, I guess that now brings us to questions, yes?
Okay, yes. Let's see here. So Brendan's before we get to the questions, Brendan just mentioned he missed the widow part while Nigel was off.
Right. So what I did was, the problem was here. And this is just a general sort of way of approaching this. When you see the problem, you don't necessarily target the problem itself, but you target a paragraph that precedes the problem. I went to this paragraph. I thought this would be a good candidate because it's a long paragraph, and I have to confess, practiced before I came online, so I knew this one would work, so definitely unfair advantage there. But I selected this paragraph with 4 clicks and then tightened up the space imperceptibly, or virtually imperceptibly. I don't think anyone would really be able to tell that the tracking has been adjusted in that paragraph, because I'm applying such a small amount, -6 1/1000ths of an M. And the reason I can do it in small increments is because I've changed this very important preference here. And the keyboard shortcut that I'm using is Option or Alt and the left arrow to go tighter. And then I also turned on that composition preference so that I can see thereafter, I can see at a glance wherever the tracking or kerning has been applied.
Great. Sasha, he turned on the green highlights under preferences. So that was
preferences, composition. Right. Now, if you're a Windows user, of course, your preferences will be under your edit menu.
While you're still in InDesign, we're having some questions specifically about InDesign, Nigel, if that's okay. So Kim is asking, under units and increments, what did you set kerning and tracking to? Was that a 1?
1. That's the smallest amount you can go to.
Okay.
So that means that when you're using it the way I'm using it, you're going to have to tap. Probably you're going to have to tap a few times, Option or Alt left arrow. But you want to be able to get away with, and that's really what I'm doing here, I'm getting away with something. You want to be able to get away with as small amount as possible so that no one's going to notice.
Right. Great. Thank you, Kim, for asking that question. Okay, excellent. So if you have any other questions, let's put them underneath the Ask a Question tab. Hopefully we can answer them without InDesign. So let me just close that window. If that's okay, Nigel, I'll close your window.
Yes, shall I? Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Please do.
Great, beautiful, beautiful work. Nothing's more gorgeous than a beautifully set balanced block of fully justified copy. That's just me though. That's just my preference. So some women like dresses, but I love type. So we're going to go through these questions. Michelle is asking, in Canada, labels have to have English and French as well as other information that Health Canada or the FDA might require. So it is a lot of text to try to squeeze on labels, especially small ones. It bugs me that these are hard to read and wish to do all I can to not add to the problem. Any recommendations on how to maximize readability in tiny spaces?
Well, I'm guessing making the space bigger is not an option. I would lean towards choosing a sans serif typeface, one that was condensed, slightly opening up the letter spacing or tracking, just ever so slightly, and try and choose one that has relatively open counters and a relatively high X height. And then you just would have to, there are going to be quite a few that fit that description, but certain ones will work better than others, but you'll just have to try them out. So come up with a short list.
That's very good.
You can do. Yeah, and also well, you would just have to adjust the leading to, that's going to depend upon how wide the labels are and how small the space is. You
can always ask the FDA to rewrite their copy.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there are certain classes of open typefaces where there are different optical sizes. So there certain ones are designed to be read at very small sizes, and they usually are called caption. So if you can find a typeface that has a caption style, that might be a good way to go.
I don't know if I've ever seen a typeface with a caption style.
Yeah. So in terms of the optical sizes, you'll have display, subhead, text, and caption, going from big to small. And there aren't that many of them, but there are a few. And presumably there will be more as OpenType evolves. But yeah, I'd go condensed sans serif and take it from there.
Right. Great. Thank you, Michelle, for asking the question. Guys, if you have any other questions, feel free to add them in the questions tab. Otherwise, I'm going to take up the rest of the time because I have a list. So Tracy is asking, what is your opinion on fully justified type versus left justified type for a publication? Is it simply preference? Also, same question for serif versus sans serif for body copy in a publication.
So justification, I think it's to some degree preference. Also the tone of the subject. These are broad generalizations, but ragged type might look less formal, more informal, and justified type might have more authority. But if you're working with very narrow columns, then you're going to have a very hard time making your justified type look good. So there is that sort of constraint that you might, that is also going to play into the equation. Somebody, this was years and years ago, and I didn't take this comment seriously, but I think it's quite funny. Somebody said that, I think it was somebody who didn't like my work, and I delivered the piece as justified. They said, oh, that justified type is so masculine. And there was definitely a negative connotation to that. I don't think alignment has a gender.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
That he would say that.
But it ultimately comes down to, well, preference is a big part of it, yeah. But both alignments present challenges. It's a question of what you do with the space that's left over, and with ragged type, that space end of the line. So you need to make sure that the lines don't vary too much in their length. So you have an even rag, as it's called. And with justified type, the variation is in the size of the word spaces themselves, and you saw how that can be addressed in justification settings. And then as to the question of serif versus sans serif, there are a lot of very general guidelines, and they are very general, and I don't think they should be taken too literally. But the general guideline is that serif is more readable in print. I don't necessarily think that's true. Mm-hmm. I think people just say that a lot. It's almost become a truth. But if you look in magazines and you look in newspapers, you'll likely find that the body text is serif. But on the other hand, on screen, the converse is often repeated as being the truth of the matter. And again, I think it's not to be taken as gospel. But sans serifs on screen tend to lend them, because they're cleaner, they tend to lend themselves more to body text.
I tend to think that it has to do with what you are reading. I mean, if it's more text, right? Yeah. So on screen, we're not reading novels necessarily. Yeah. So it depends.
Yes, of course, the subject matter is a big factor in this. Yeah.
I have a question just to add on that, and I don't want to ask a lot of questions because we just got 2 more. But if you have a lot of text and you're trying to cut down the page count, Nigel, do you think that if we went fully justified on the book, on the novella that you're setting, for example, do you feel like that would cut down some pages based on the amount of space that it's starting to fill up?
I don't know about pages, but maybe page. Okay. Because it's only 60 pages in total, it might save a page, but it's a good point. Justified text is more economical in terms of space usage than ragged right.
So not only the alignment, but also, and you had mentioned this before, font choice also helps to save, can be more economical as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. If you needed to save space, go to a more condensed typeface.
That's right. Okay, cool. Thank you, Tracy, for asking that. And also, it depends what you're setting. I think that will help you make that decision. So Sina is asking, thank you for a very interesting session. I thought the part about the H&J violations was very interesting and seems like a good way to keep track of your document. I wonder how few yellow markings you should aim to have in a finished document. Are there any rules of thumb or ways of thinking about this that you can share with us?
Well, as I said, the highlighting is not literally bad. It's it's saying that InDesign can't do what you're asking of it. So one way for me to get rid of the yellow highlighting would be to be less restrictive in those justification settings, but then that's going to actually make my text look worse, because I'm saying I don't really care about how you vary the word space or letter space. So I'm asking a lot in the justification settings that I'm using, and that's inevitably going to mean that there are times when InDesign can't do it. I don't know that you can put a number on it. You just want to have as little of that as possible. Also be aware that you can't ask the impossible. You need to be reasonable in your expectations and what you're asking of InDesign. But if you do have a good line length, as I mentioned, somewhere between 50 and 65 characters, then your odds are good. But if you reduce the width of your column so that you've only got between 35 and 40 characters, and which is fairly common in magazines, you see it a lot, but that's going to make it much harder to get good justified text, and you would inevitably have more of that yellow highlighting if you have that composition preference turned on.
That's right. And the other thing, Stina, is that be sure to train your eyes and learn typography. And although that these are great software tools that give you some hints, don't trust all your typesetting to the software. Would you agree? Like,
yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
We're the designer, not InDesign. Sorry, Adobe.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Thank you for asking that.
Yes, good question. InDesign is fantastic, but we're better.
Our brains work better than InDesign, hopefully.
Yeah, for the moment anyway.
For the moment, yes. So Breck has one question, and we're going to finish up with this one. So feelings on variable type. For the web, for example, how do you see it coming back to influence typesetting in print? I was thinking of the caption style, for instance.
Yeah, I don't know much about it except what I've seen demoed, and I've played with it a little bit in Illustrator, and it looks exciting. I'm a bit surprised that it hasn't caught on like a wildfire. It seems to be a slow burn, if anything. Now, variable type, that there was back the late 90s and the early part of the 21st century, there was this thing called multiple master fonts, which was the same concept, and it didn't catch on. I think it didn't catch on because the naming conventions were so arcane that I just couldn't figure out what was going on. It wasn't, the features of multiple masters weren't made as transparent to the user as they could have been, but that seems to be improved with variable type. So I mean, I guess I'm saying I don't know, but I'm watching the space carefully, and yeah, in terms of that earlier question about the caption in a very small amount of space, or the labeling text in a very small amount of space, variable type would be potentially a good solution there.
It would. I always wonder about how we're going to purchase no longer separate fonts, but full type families, right?
Yeah.
Be interesting. Breck, I hope that answered your question. Thank you so much for asking. Just as a last thing, Nigel, just a question from me. Are there any hyphen violation composition preferences that that are available in InDesign?
You mean beyond the H and J violations?
Yeah, anything in hyphens that we could see right away, or anything like that?
No, I mean, there are a few other things relating to hyphens that I didn't get into. There's discretionary hyphen. Determine, you can make a decision on hyphenating a word differently from its suggested hyphenation. That's it's pretty underwhelming to demo because it doesn't often behave the way you want it to. And there's also non-breaking hyphens when you want to keep a compound word together so that it doesn't break at the hyphen. Related to that, just make sure you've got the correct language dictionary applied to your text, because that is going to determine how the hyphens are implemented.
Right.
So if you're working in French, make sure you've got the French language dictionary and not the English, because the hyphenation will be completely different.
That's right. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Do you have any other than your book? Are there any other resources or books that you would recommend for us to dive even deeper?
Well, the classic is The Elements of Typographic Style by Robert Bringhurst. And so I would recommend that, and I'd also highly recommend the InDesign Secrets Facebook page and the InDesign Secrets page as being a great resource for anything related to InDesign.
That's great.
Where there are a lot of very helpful people willing to answer your questions.
Great,
and
thank you.
Share their knowledge.
And Breck, yes, the Bible. I always think of Bringhurst's book as the Bible for sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Nigel. I really appreciate your time. That was very enlightening. And I love all the composition preferences that I never knew. So that blows my mind. And I will definitely use them going forward. That will help me a lot, especially on multi-page documents where you're just scouring all the text. Very, very helpful. Thank you so much. And cool. So we look forward to your book, which is coming out in a couple of months.
Well, as soon as I finish it, really. Okay. So if I, get myself in gear, May, June.
Okay.
Yeah.
We look forward to it. So thank you again. Thanks everyone for joining us, and
yes,
definitely join the grep Secrets book is grep Secrets Facebook group. Was that the Treasures of Grep, right? And the InDesign Secrets Facebook group. We'll hope to see everyone there. Thank you, Nigel, and you have a good day, guys.
Great.
Bye
now.